10 Ways, as Rachel said, 10 Ways to be Adored When Landing a Lord is a Regency set historical romance. It is the sequel to 9 Rules, which is upstairs. And the hero, Nicholas St. John, is the twin brother of the hero of the first book. Everybody loves twins. We're not reading about twins. So Nick is named one of London's Lords to Land by a popular ladies' magazine in 1823, and he does what any good man would do in this situation, and he flees the city. Lands himself at a country house in Yorkshire, where, unbeknownst to him, it is entirely populated by women. The woman who runs this house is, she's too many secrets, she's too little money, she has a very leaky roof, and a father who wasn't so good to her, and that's where we start. Perhaps you know him, your guardian, Oliver, Lord Densmore. What's he like? She watched Nick intently and as he searched for the appropriate adjective. Well, he certainly is entertaining. Entertaining. Isabel tested the word on her tongue, deciding that she did not care for it. Yes, how was it that you described your father? A carnival of a man? Isabel nodded. Like follows like, but he is not a man I would choose to protect my family. Of course he wasn't. Isabel had known the truth, but a small part of her had hoped that in this, his last act, her father might have been a father to her. An immense pressure built in her chest. All of a sudden, she couldn't breathe. So unsettled was she at the thought of yet another man, irresponsible and nevertheless so powerful, holding sway over her. She could feel the panic rising, pure and unfettered. She tried for a deep breath, but the air wouldn't come. Isabel. The sound of her name came from far away as she closed her eyes and willed herself to breathe. Nick was next to her then, his strong hand at her back, running along the bones of her corset. These things are torture devices, he muttered as he lifted her gaze with one finger, forcing her to meet his. Look at me. Breathe. She shook her head. She paused again. I'm fine. You're not fine. Breathe. The firm calm of his voice settled her, and she did as she was told. She took several deep, shaking breaths under the guidance of his liquid gaze and the warm stroke of his hand at her back. His eyes flashed as he shifted his weight to one knee and took both her hands in his. You are weighed down with secrets, Isabel. At some point, you are going to have to share them. Why not speak what you cannot stop thinking? Isabel caught her breath at the words, so soft, so coaxing. What if she told him? What if she let some of her secrets go? They hovered there on the brink of something more powerful than either of them, and Isabel felt the silence as if it were a physical weight. He rubbed her hands between his carefully, tracing his broad, wonderfully roughened fingertips down each of her fingers in turn. She watched the movement, wondering at his calloused skin. How had one of London's most coveted lords developed the hands of a workman? She was so distracted by the feel of his warm, bare hands on hers that she nearly gave in to his request. Nearly. But somewhere deep within her, she knew that if she opened up to this man, it would be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. He made her want to believe that she could share her burdens, when the truth was that she was alone, and she always would be. You do not have to share your secrets, Isabel, but do not let them rob you of life's pleasures. Her eyes flew to his, but he was not looking at her. Instead, he was watching his ministrations, the press and stroke of his thumbs that sent the most marvelous waves of pleasure through her. She sighed and fell back against the cushion of her chair, knowing she should stop him, but unable to muster the energy to do so. Whatever he was doing to her hand, it was lovely. Far lovelier than anything she'd ever experienced in a very long time. Her gaze slid up to his neck, where the corded muscles slipped beneath his shirt collar in lovely sun-kissed lines. She had never noticed anyone's neck before, and following the length of his throat up to his jaw, she wondered why. Necks were quite magnificent, actually. He shifted the pressure on her hands, rubbing the base of her thumb with the strong pats of her fingers, and she turned liquid at the touch, sinking further into her chair. She raised her eyes to his face, taking in the sharp angle of his jaw, where it met the lines of his throat, his strong chin and firm, soft lips, and the slightly, nearly imperceptible bend in his nose. It had been broken at some point, perhaps at the same time he had been scarred. She braved to look at his eyes then, watched his intense gaze, the brilliant blue that she'd noticed from the start. He was beautiful. He had spoken of life's pleasures, and she wanted him to show them to her. His kiss was an exploration of a caress. His hand slid into the hair at the nape of her neck as his lips passed over hers in a feather-light touch once, twice, intoxicating her with sensation. Isabel sighed, her lips parting, and he rewarded her by deepening the kiss, aligning his mouth to hers and sliding his tongue along her full bottom lip, leaving a path of fire in its wake. She spread her fingers wide, pressing her hands over his broad shoulders and herself against his chest, willing him closer, and he understood, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her into the cradle of his, before breaking off the kiss to trail his lips across her cheek to her ear where he whispered her name, more sensation than sound. She could feel his satisfied smile at the skin there as he pressed his lips to the soft spot behind her ear, where her pulse beat a mad, unbearable rhythm. He rained soft, irresistible kisses down the side of her neck, pausing to scrape his teeth against her skin until she whimpered her pleasure. Sorry, I've rewritten this. He worried the soft skin where her neck met her shoulder, licking softly, the roughness of his tongue making her wild. She gasped, and the sound brought his attention back to her mouth. One hand slid up her side to the edge of her breast. Once there, it stilled, and the lack of movement proved to be her undoing. Her breast felt infinitely heavier than it ever had, full and wanting in a way that made her desperate for his touch. She wanted his hand on her as she had never dreamed of prior to this moment, to this man. She squirmed then, willing him to move, to touch her, and he lifted his mouth from hers, opening his brilliant blue eyes and capturing her gaze. What is it, beauty? His thumb moved, just barely, but enough for her to know that he knew precisely what she wanted. He was teasing her. She couldn't say it. The heel of his hand, that wicked hand, so close to where she wanted it, pressed against her, and he set his lips to her ear. So beautiful, so passionate. Show me. The demand unleashed something inside her. She slid her hand to where his lay, and her gaze moved with more courage than she'd ever known she had, and captured his. When the heavy weight of her breast settled in his grasp, they both watched as he stroked his fingers across the skin there, running the edge of his thumb over the place where the nipple pebbled beneath the fabric. She gasped with the sensation, and their gazes collided. Tell me how it feels. She blushed. I cannot. He repeated the caress, and she sucked in another breath. You can. She shook her head. I've never, it's too much, too good. He rewarded her with another long kiss as he slid one finger under the edge of her gown, running the back of it against her heated, straining skin. She cried out, breaking the kiss, and he set his forehead against hers, the ghost of a smile playing against his swollen lips. It shall only get better. The words were filled with heat